Hello everyone, welcome to a very special episode of JTV. I'm joined by Hen Mazzig, who is live in Tel Aviv right now. Hen is a former IDF soldier and one of the foremost outspoken advocates for Israel and the Jewish people in the world today. Hen, thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot to talk about, and I want to focus on the events of the past few days and weeks because they have been momentous. There's obviously going to be trying days ahead. Israel obviously cannot be complacent, but this is a big deal. What's happened? Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. Of course, Hezbollah itself is not gone yet, but the head has been chopped off. I want to know your reaction to the events of that, also just more generally the past few weeks, the Pedro attacks and everything that we've seen.
Yeah, I think it's been incredible. I think that after over 10 months of Israel working so hard to try and release and rescue our hostages from Hamas captivity, facing rockets from several fronts and attacks from 7 fronts in total, Israel was able to remind the world our strategic advantage, to remind them that you can't just attack Israelis and Jews in the streets without having to pay a price for it. The fact that Israelis had to go into bomb shelters for so long and had to be, really scared was so heartbreaking. And I think that time that Israel was able to show that we have the technological advantage and the Patriots attack coming first was really monumental. Following that, the attack on Hezbollah leaders, taking down Nasrallah. All of this is really showing the world, but specifically to our enemies in the Middle East, that we are not going anywhere, that we have the might to be able to fight back. And I think that it really helps the morale in Israel. Many of my friends said that it give them more strength and comfort to know that the IDF is again having the upper hand. Some people say, it's the same people that were responsible for October 7th now are showing us that they have the strength to fight back. So it's giving them some reassurance, I guess. But it's definitely a positive achievement, and it's just the beginning. As we know that Israel is continuing to fight against Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis just yesterday in Yemen. Yeah.
It's also encouraging to see the fact that Israel persists despite so much international pressure, right? So you touched on this in some of your recent tweets. We saw the media reaction. We saw the world before the Nasrallah killing saying, we want a de-escalation. After the Pedro attacks, we want a ceasefire. They barely were able to even mention Hezbollah by name. They just spoke of Israel and Lebanon. What did you make of that? And did you find that quite revealing?
Yeah, revealing, definitely not surprising for me and for anyone that has been paying attention. The media has a clear bias, the international media, when it comes to Israel. This inability of calling the attackers who they are and the victims who they are, and the inability to see Israel ever as victims of anything, completely stripping Israel of its right to defend itself. All of it really comes together when news like this break, because they really can't bring themselves to identify, as you said, Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. I mean, the fact that Sky News posted pictures of Hassan Nasrallah smiling and looking like a Santa Claus or of some sort of some old grandpa that you feel very compassionate to. It's all meant to make the world question what is terrorism and who are the terrorists. And I think all of this really comes together when you see the protests in London, in the streets of London, when you see the protests around the world calling Israel a terrorist. I mean, they were able to switch the entire conversation, to flip the narrative around, make Israel into the terrorist state, and make we even see Israelis being branded as Nazis. I mean, Jews branded as Nazis. How it should have been insane, but it's still something that is happening today. And I think it's very telling that the media is just unable to report news when it comes to Israel in a way that is. I don't even want them to be fair. Just be balanced. Just report the news as they are, but they have to twist it around to get their narrative across.
Right, and you even posted on Twitter recently showing how there was the BBC were calling it a tit for tat between Israel and Lebanon. It's just so disgraceful, isn't it? Like the just being so morally ambiguous, not being able to be clear on who is the aggressor and who is the self-defender.
Yeah, I mean, they have to do it because otherwise their narrative, the narrative that they have built for so long against
Mm.
Israel, would just not hold water. And I mean, the BBC is such an excellent example of a corrupt news agency that it was just. I mean, I used to be in their studios quite often. I know that there's a massive team working behind the scenes on every news report. So it's not just a mistake, and you don't just make a mistake once and over and over and over again throughout the war. There was a report coming out that 1,500 times they violated their own standards. Today there was another report coming out that from the former head of BBC News saying that the media agency is completely biased. All of this really makes you think: are we living in some sort of upside down world where truth doesn't matter to anyone anymore other than to us? And it's. I think we should be afraid when we see that.
And just as you say, that we live in this upside down world where I wouldn't even say people, but the elites, the institutions that we have in the Western world will describe terrorism as resistance. And then when Israel fights back, inevitably they always say they're going after civilians, which is such a heinous blood libel, quite frankly. But for me, I feel like truth and falsehood, for anyone that's paying the slightest bit of attention, just seeing what's reported in the news, the truth is becoming clearer and clearer. The fact that there were we had all these question marks and concerns about UNRWA for years, and now we know they're directly complicit in October 7th. We had these concerns about, is it just a few pockets of people who are terrorists and hate Israel, but actually the majority of them just want their own state. And now we see there is a serious cultural issue among Arabs in Gaza and Judea and Samaria where they still support October 7th. Things becoming so clear. I then saw, I'll just get you up on the screen, but I saw the Palestinian ambassador to the UK referred to what Israel going after the Nasrallah bunker as attacking civilians, and he said that as such on here, and we then found out moments later that it wasn't. That it was clearly getting rid of the head of Hezbollah. Is it not? Do you get the sense on the ground that for some people, for people paying attention, that either weren't so interested in the conflict prior, or people and now they're getting clued up, or they had biases perhaps more against Israel and now they're just seeing things? Are people on the ground starting to wake up to the truth and lies in this conflict?
I mean, I live between London and Tel Aviv, and in London, I don't think there's any wakening up of the public by and large. What I'm seeing is that people are fed these lies and they just believe it. And if, I live in East London, it's very liberal and progressive, and people are just buying into this notion that those tyrants and radical regimes, extremist regimes that promote fundamentalist approach to the entire world are actually their friends for some insane reason. Meanwhile, in Israel, I think we are well aware of the bias that the international community has towards us, from the offices of the UN down to the offices of the BBC and Sky News and media channels and newspapers around the world. I don't think it's something new for Israelis. I do think that there's some shock among Israelis that are more exposed to the pop culture, being influenced by this narrative, seeing celebrities and seeing it on people that they follow outside of the conflict taking a stand on this based on falsehood, and that really, I think, surprised a lot of Israelis. But I'm not sure what's the goal of this campaign, but what it gets is that Israelis just understand that we have no one to rely on, that the world has failed us, the world will not come to our help. In fact, people in the UK and in America are calling for an arms embargo on Israel. So what other options do we have? If anything, it's emboldened Israelis to do everything they can to protect themselves, because no one else will. And perhaps that was the truth, the hard truth that was underlining all of this for millennia.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that what we're seeing now is any different to the hostility to Jews throughout history. It's the same old story. Now, the question is, I always feel silly asking what comes next, because everyone said, literally, I mean, Jared Kushner, the former American Middle East negotiator, was saying no one could have predicted that Israel would have been able to achieve what they have achieved over the past few days. It's a miracle. And so then I paused before saying what comes next. But nevertheless, just based on what we're seeing on the ground, based on the logical calculations Israel and the IDF will have to be making now, what is your analysis on the strategic moves they're going to have to make now moving forward? And also, what are the key strategic concerns?
Right. I mean, it's true. No one could have predicted anything that happened in the last year, since October 7th. But I do think that we're going to see Israel continuing its targeted attacks against Hezbollah. I think it will be inevitable for Israel to maneuver in southern Lebanon. It's something that they've already had forces going into southern Lebanon to eliminate specific facilities of Hezbollah. But I think a larger a maneuver in southern Lebanon, because they won't enter outside of the southern Lebanon where Hezbollah has built this terrorist state. So I think that will come next. I think that Iran is in this, the Islamic Republic in Iran is in this difficult position. They know that they can't face war on their border. That's why they funded with billions of dollars those proxies, if it's the Houthis, the Hezbollah and Hamas. The goal was to create this ring of fire around Israel just so that they won't be affected by it directly. It's a weak fundamentalist administration that is oppressing their own people, and the people of Iran stand with Israel by and large. They don't want this regime to control them.
Do you think it's the majority?
Yeah, maybe that. I mean, that would be an educated guess. But yeah, I think that many Iranians would support Israel if there wasn't such a restriction of freedom of speech in the country. And for many Iranians that I know, for many Iranians that I see in the protests for Israel, I think they are sick and tired of this regime that has brutally oppressed them for so long. So I doubt that Iran would get into the fighting directly. I feel like the Middle East, the fundamentalists in the Middle East are expecting them to, but I doubt that they will. And I think Israel should just finish the job with Hezbollah, make sure that the Lebanese army is controlling the south. I think all of this will encourage Sinwar and Hamas to start making steps, because they would see that Iran is not coming for the help of Hezbollah. They would see that Hezbollah is so weakened. It has to be, whatever the ending of all of it, whatever the ending means, has to include the release of the hostages. I think that is the main issue for Israel right now, for the Israeli politicians. Every success is tainted by the fact that there are over 100 hostages held in Hamas captivity. So I think that is a strategic, it's a top priority for Israel. So we'll have to see that happening for Israel to be able to agree to any ceasefire at this point.
How degraded is Hamas at this stage?
Almost completely, according to people that I speak to, senior officials, IDF officials here in Israel. They're telling me that their military capabilities have been almost completely eradicated to the point that they can't even, launch rockets anymore. I don't think there was a rocket in the last few days from Gaza. Their military capabilities have been weakened so much. I think one of the commanders said that in terms of military abilities, they have none at this point.
And presumably that's exactly what Israel wishes to do with Hezbollah. So you think you don't anticipate Iran directly engaging in another assault on Israel in the coming days and weeks?
No, I don't see it. I don't see it happening. America has left the Lincoln plane carrier in the region, right outside of the shores of Iran. It's a strong threat to Iran to not think about engaging in another attack on Israel, and I don't see them making this move, and especially as they haven't made it yet. The fact that they had to move the leader of Iran, and the biggest chip that they have is the nuclear facilities that they've been working on, and they know that would be the first thing that Israel would attack if they start a war. And that, it's not a project of a few years. It's over a decade of work that the Islamic Republic in Iran has been investing in it. I think that's that would be the last thing that they would jeopardize. And that's why we haven't seen any retaliation to what the supreme leader called the assassination of his dear friend and brother. So that just tells you everything.
Mm. And I'm curious, how is the morale in Israel? You're in Tel Aviv right now. Obviously, morale was deeply shaken in the aftermath of October 7th. But Israel's had some significant wins. I mean, getting Hania in Tehran, I mean, that is... it's the stuff of movies. And then, of course, what's happened with Nasrallah now and the Pedro attacks. But obviously, we're not out of the woods at all, and complacency is the enemy of success, really. And we have to be humble and grateful and all these things. What is the feeling on the ground at the moment?
I think Israelis have this special characteristic. I don't know where it comes from, but they're able to keep living no matter how bad things are. During the Nasrallah assassination, I was at my cousin's wedding here in Israel. Everyone was celebrating. They actually played that pop song that is about Nasrallah that was played everywhere during this wedding, during the simcha, which was amazing to see. I think Israelis are resilient. They're resilient because they have to be. I mean, there's no alternative. They can't stop their lives for all here because of rocket. I've been through several rockets since I arrived, and people go to the bomb shelter and they get back out. And it's even when we were talking, you asked me how are you, and I said, oh yeah, I think it's just 4 rockets, not too bad. So it's something about Israelis. They're resilient, but I don't want people to confuse this resilience with saying they're resilient, they can take anything. It has an impact. It has a cost. The fact that there's over 60,000 Israelis that were displaced from the north and they can't go back to their homes, the communities that were displaced from outside of the Gaza Strip, it will take a long time to recover from all of this, to bring back the sense of security and safety to Israelis. But I think every time the head of Hamas, Hania, the head of Hezbollah, Nasrallah are being eliminated, every time there's an operation like this, it gives Israelis more confidence in the IDF. There was an interview yesterday with the head of the IDF spokesperson unit, Daniel Agari, the IDF spokesperson, and he said something about how he recognized that they have a lot of responsibility, but the most important thing that is leading the IDF now is to gain the trust of Israelis again, because they feel like they lost it. And I think there's a lot of truth in it, but not to the point that Israelis do not trust the IDF, but that there's some hole in us about security and safety, and it's a hole that we never had before. And yet, during my cousin's wedding, her brother-in-law got a message that calling him to the reserve, and he said, I'm going. And that's part of the spirit of Israel. It's a spirit that we all chip in, we all come in and carrying the weight together, and we all serve in the IDF. We know soldiers that are in the IDF. So I think that's part of why we are so confident in the abilities of the IDF, even though we have this, something that is not whole within us.
Absolutely. And it's interesting for those who are watching this that are living outside of Israel. It's important to understand that when you actually go into Israel, you may often have these, when you're looking at it from the outside, you have certain anxieties and certain sense of, oh, this is a really dangerous place or whatever. When you're inside of Israel, it's almost hard to explain, and Hen will know what I'm talking about because he's there. There's something about being there where of course, that we have those tiresome anxieties that we want to get rid of, and Israel absolutely deserves to live in peace and security. But there's something about being there. The spirit of Israel just lifts you. It gives you a sense of courage, a sense of just feeling uplifted. And in some ways, I found this when I was there just a few months ago, just a greater sense of calm than in a more deep spiritual sense than one might sometimes feel looking at it as an outsider. A real sense of unity and common purpose, and feeling that on a deeper level, this is something that really gives us a huge amount of strength. And you see it every single day when you're there and in Israel. And I also feel that, as Hem was describing, as it is that it's like it's mad that Israelis are able to go about their daily lives whilst facing all these pressures. But that's sort of been like the Jewish people's story in a way. We've kind of been immunized to the threat of genocide through, forget even just recent history, just all our ancient holidays that we celebrate. It's so part of our incredible story. And lastly, talking about the Jewish people's story, I want to touch a bit on your book. Obviously, you're a big Israel advocate, and we're seeing you on Piers Morgan and other key Western media outlets. And the great accusation leveled at Israel is that, the root of it, the original sin, so to speak, is that she is some kind of foreign occupier. She doesn't deserve to be there. She's displaced the indigenous Arabs. It all couldn't be further from the truth. And one of the things that people miss is that half of Israel's population come from the Arab world. Or I say come from, they were living there prior to Israel's existence. We all obviously come from the land of Israel if you go back thousands of years. But you wanted to really bust that myth. And you feel that's a really important thing to talk about. And that's what you discuss in your book, The Wrong Kind of Jew. Tell us a bit about that, why you felt it was so important to write it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The important thing to remember is that all Jews come from Israel. That's what being indigenous is. Doesn't matter if we lived in Europe for a few hundred of years, or if we lived in the Amazons, or in America, or like my family in Iraq and Tunisia. My family came to Israel in the early 50s from those two Muslim and Arab countries that oppressed them in so many ways that we forget to speak about this historic time, this specific time in history where Jews lived without rights. They lived as second-class citizens. They were oppressed and brutalized, and they had to escape. Almost 1 million Jewish refugees came to Israel as stateless refugees, had nothing but the clothes to their backs. That's the story of my grandparents. And I think that's important because it's just the evidence that all Jews come from this region. And those people, my family, were oppressed by Arabs, the same Arabs that today control majority of the Middle East. Palestinians are Arabs as well. There is an Arab empire, and it's very silly for people, specifically British people, to not recognize that Jews are the indigenous people of this land, and that there's an Arab empire that has oppressed them because there's so many countries speaking Arabic. There's only one country speaking Hebrew. That's how you know where an empire is and which countries are a nation state, and Israel is a nation state. And I mean, even the term Palestine was given to this land by European colonialists, right? It wasn't the name of this area. They were trying to erase the name of the Jews. Of course, I'm speaking about the Greeks and the Romans that controlled this area. So there was so many empires controlling this land, but the Jewish community, the Jewish people are the indigenous people. Indigenous rights do not expire, and they reclaim their homeland. And that's what I'm hoping that Copts and Maronite Christians in Lebanon and Kurds and Yazidis and Iranians, Persians will be able to do, to reclaim their indigenous homeland and get rid of the empires that oppress them.
And the thing that I think people miss, and it baffles me how this lie has spread, is that I think people seem to think, okay, let's say Jews think they're indigenous, and fine, maybe they are, but their impression is that we sort of came to the land and kicked everyone out and said, right, we're here, and this is our place, and everyone else can leave. And that was actually before I kind of remember looking into the history in my teen years. I kind of had that assumption as well. And then you see that this is not what happened, that you had a gradual return over many decades. And then before there's any war, before there's any displacement, the UN says, okay, let's, there was once a Jewish sovereignty here. There are Arabs living here. You're both vying for statehood. You both have claims. So we'll just create two states, and you can have Jews living in the Arab country and Arabs living in the Jewish country. And there's no displacement. There's no Nakba. There's no catastrophe. And people seem to think it was like, no, the Jews just came there and it was only in reaction to this, where there never needed to be any displacement whatsoever, that you had the displacement where Israel was being threatened with genocide and she had to defend herself. It's what I feel like is the crux of this is that time and again, the chicken and the egg are the wrong way round. Like people say, well, Israel is occupying Gaza and it's a prison camp, so of course they're going to resist. No. We left Gaza And it was only 2 years later, there was not a blockade, a censorship for weapons. What, we can't censor for weapons? And you're saying that therefore they're resisting that? No, everything, they're getting the chicken and the egg the wrong way around. It is first that you have the hateful ideology, and then Israel doing what she needs to do to survive. So the objection is not to Israel doing something aggressive. The objection is to Israel existing.
Yeah. And my family lived as an oppressed minority in the Middle East without rights. They weren't allowed to ride horses. They weren't allowed to own specific areas of land. They weren't allowed to practice law or doing anything like their Arabs counterparts. They were living as dhimmis, as a protected minority, but not really, protected. You also have to ask yourself, protected against what? And it's protected against the majority. So they really were oppressed. And I'm telling you, there's no historic evidence whatsoever of Jews fighting in the way that the Palestinians have, the Hamas has on October 7th. We never killed anyone. We never attacked the countries we lived in. We helped them. There was, at some point, Baghdad was 2/3 Jewish majority. They were so integrated, part of the everyday life. That was not, they tried their best to make everything they can for themselves and for the country, but never to use violence in the way that we're seeing it. So I don't buy this notion that somehow because there's a border between Israel and Gaza that existed before October 7th, and there's a border between Egypt and Gaza, and Egypt also occupied Gaza for a long time. So why didn't they resist it, if we're calling it resistance, against Egypt? Why is it against Israel, right? Because it's not about occupation. It's not about control of land. It's about the fact that Jews dare to exist. And that has been, the issue for such a long time in history. The fact that Jews have the temerity to not just lie down and die, and that Jewish blood is not cheap anymore. And we are going to fight for ourselves, and we are going to stand up for ourselves. And that's what annoys the Hamas, that's what annoys the Islamic Republic in Iran, and that's what annoys the BBC as well.
Absolutely. And we're going to keep annoying them, whether they like it or not. Hen, thank you so much, not just for your time now on JTV, but for everything you're doing for the Jewish people and for Am Yisrael. It's greatly appreciated, and please keep it up.
Thank you so much. I hope I'll be back soon.
Absolutely. And let's do a debate as well. We were discussing at the start how we want to get you maybe doing some debates on our platform. In the comment section, please let us know who you'd like to see Hen debating, and we'll invite them onto the show and see what happens. Thanks so much, Hen.
Thank you so much for having me.
So much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.